Winter had a way of peeling life down to its quiet bones, revealing what people tried so hard to hide. On the far edge of the frontier, where wind hummed low songs through the pines and frost rested on every forgotten fence post, Beverly Carter learned how cold could seep past skin and find the softer chambers of the heart. She moved through the snow-packed yard with her shawl pulled tight, boots sinking with each tired step, breath rising like pale ghosts that vanished before reaching the sky. Her family's cabin sat hunched against the storm, rooflines heavy with white, its windows glowing faintly with a dim fire that had burned too low for too many nights. She wasn't afraid of hardship, only of how easily the world mistook her silence for weakness. She had once believed her life would follow a gentler path. There had been warmth in her days before winter truly set in, before Elias Ward turned his back in front of half the town and let her fall into the humiliation he created with one careless sentence. He had called her unsuitable, too fragile for the life he wanted, too plain for the future he imagined. He'd ended months of courting with a shrug, a whisper, a look over her shoulder, as though he already searched for someone better. People talked. They always talked. Beverly had learned to walk as if she didn't hear the murmurs. Still, sometimes the words clung to her like snowflakes on eyelashes, cold and impossible to shake free. Her mother tried to soothe her with soft assurances, but comfort had its limits when woodpiles ran low and the wind clawed at the walls. Beverly worked because she must. Because winter demanded strength whether a heart ached or not. She gathered fallen branches, snapped brittle twigs with numb fingers, filled a small sled with whatever scraps she could find. She didn't notice the snow shifting deeper into the woods, didn't see how far she had wandered until the trees swallowed the sound of home. The creek cut through the land like a silver scar, still half frozen from last week's storm. She stepped near its edge, testing ice that glimmered deceptively smooth. One moment she stood on trembling white glass, and the next the world shattered beneath her boots. A scream tore from her throat, but broke into pieces as the water swallowed her. The shock was a violent fist closing around her ribs, dragging her under as if winter itself wanted to keep her. Her arms fought instinctively, thrashing, reaching for branches she couldn't find. For a breathless instant, she thought she might simply disappear. Then a sound cracked through the storm. Heavy footsteps, urgent, powerful. A shadow moved across the jagged ice, and strong hands plunged into the freezing water. She felt a grip around her forearm, steady as carved stone, pulling her upward until air met her lungs like fire. Her vision blurred, snow spinning above her, river roaring below, and then she was lifted effortlessly into arms warmer than the world around them. She blinked against the cold, trying to focus. All she could see was a broad chest, long dark hair damp with melted snow, and a face carved with calm strength. The man carrying her was enormous, towering like a mountain spirit stepped into mortal shape. She had seen him once from afar, the Apache known as Tawa Greyhawk, often spoken of with a mixture of awe and caution. Town whispers painted him in half-truths. A giant, a protector, a man who rarely spoke but never hesitated when a life was at risk. Up close, he seemed neither frightening nor distant. He simply moved with purpose, eyes steady, breath even despite the cold biting at his bare shoulders. He knelt in the snow and laid her gently on a bed of pine needles where the wind broke softer between trees. His voice rumbled low, a warm sound that didn't quite belong to winter. "Keep still. Breathe. You are safe." The words flowed without urgency, as if he were speaking to the storm itself, convincing it to loosen its grip on her. Beverly tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too violently. He removed the heavy blanket draped across his own back and wrapped it around her trembling form. She felt heat settle against her skin like a returning heartbeat. Her gaze rose to meet his. For a moment she forgot about the cold. She forgot Elias, the whispers, the weary ache she carried for months. All she saw was the quiet worry in Tawa's dark eyes, a kind of unspoken responsibility that felt deeper than duty. He brushed wet hair from her cheek, checking for bruises, examining her hands with gentle care that felt impossibly tender coming from someone built like a warrior carved from rock. He offered no further words, only the steady comfort of his presence. Beverly wished she had the strength to thank him properly, but exhaustion pulled at her like heavy chains. Her lashes drooped as her breath slowed. She clutched the blanket he'd given her, feeling the lingering heat from his skin. In that fragile moment between waking and sleep, she wondered why a man like him, a man who seemed to belong to wind, stone, and storm, would risk himself so quickly for a stranger. Tawa lifted her again when he sensed her fading, carrying her with the same ease one might carry a sleeping child. The steady rhythm of his footsteps lulled her toward unconsciousness, and she surrendered, trusting the warmth beneath her cheek more than she had trusted anything for months. She drifted in and out of awareness, catching pieces of the world. The crunch of snow underfoot, the deep steadiness of his breathing, the faint scent of cedar clinging to his hair. She felt oddly safe, safer than she had felt even before her heart had been broken in the town square. When he finally reached the clearing near her family's cabin, he set her down softly against a stack of dried hay, and watched her mother rush outside, panic flooding her face as she wrapped her arms around her daughter. Beverly tried to speak, to tell her mother not to fear, but only managed a whisper lost in the wind. She turned her head, wanting to see Tawa one last time, to anchor herself to the man who had returned her to the world. But he was already stepping back, already fading into snowfall like some giant spirit retreating into the wilderness. She lifted a weak hand toward him. He paused, just long enough for their eyes to meet across the distance, then disappeared between the trees, leaving warmth in his wake. And Beverly, held tightly in her mother's trembling arms, realized she was shivering not from cold, but from the impossible truth that she could not forget the man who had saved her. Snow clung stubbornly to the cabins and pines in the days that followed, settling like a quiet reminder that winter rarely softened for long. Beverly Carter spent those mornings drifting between wakefulness and memory, hearing again the thunder of cracking ice, feeling the weightless fear of sinking beneath the frozen creek, then the strength of arms lifting her toward life. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the broad silhouette of the Apache man who carried her from the jaws of winter. She didn't know why his face returned to her again and again, only that the vision steadied something inside her that had been trembling since the day Elias humiliated her before the whole town. Her mother kept close watch while Beverly regained her strength, fixing broth, warming blankets, whispering every few hours that she was lucky, blessed, protected. Beverly listened, grateful for tenderness, yet unable to tell her mother that what unsettled her most wasn't the fall into the water, but the warmth she felt while lying against the chest of a man the town feared. She told herself it was only gratitude, only the lingering shock of survival, but her heart didn't obey such simplifications. It kept reaching for that memory of quiet strength. By the third day she could walk outside again, though the cold nipped harder at her recovering body. She pulled on her shawl, stepping into powdery white that creaked underfoot. The world felt sharper, as though winter had polished every branch and stone into cleaner shapes. She wandered toward the treeline, letting the stillness settle around her. She meant only to breathe fresh air, but instead she found herself listening, for footsteps that didn't belong to the wind. She didn't notice him at first. Tawa Greyhawk stood half-hidden behind a pine trunk, tall as the tree he leaned on, watching the forest's edge with the alert stillness of someone born to read the land. He wasn't looking at her. He was listening for danger, scanning the snow for signs of roaming wolves or shifting weather. Still, Beverly's breath caught. Seeing him again felt like stepping into the heartbeat she remembered in the water. When he finally turned his head, their eyes met with a softness she didn't expect. He didn't move forward, didn't bow or smile or attempt any gesture the town thought proper. He simply existed with that grounded dignity that seemed carved into his very bones. She took a hesitant step toward him, heart fluttering with a strange mixture of shyness and gratitude. He lowered his gaze respectfully, acknowledging her without imposing his presence. She managed a quiet thank you, though her voice shook more than she wished. He nodded once. "Any life is worth pulling from the winter," he said, tone deep and even, as though the words themselves were branches laid carefully in place. He didn't elaborate, didn't claim heroism, didn't ask why she wandered near the woods again. Instead, he bent to gather fallen limbs with the calm focus of someone who worked for the sake of working. Beverly watched him for a moment, studying the way he moved. Unhurried, efficient, the opposite of the frantic men she'd grown accustomed to in town. She found herself wanting to linger, to understand the silence that wrapped around him like a second coat. She offered to help gather wood, and he paused long enough to glance at her hands, gauging her strength before giving a single approving nod. They worked without speaking, and somehow that quiet felt more intimate than any conversation she'd shared with Elias during their entire courtship. When she lifted a heavier log than she could handle, Tawa stepped forward, taking it from her without touching her skin, as if respecting her comfort mattered more to him than displaying strength. She murmured an apology, embarrassed, but he shook his head, telling her gently that winter asked too much of everyone, even the brave. The words settled deep inside her, warming something that had grown cold long before she fell through the ice. In the days that followed, she saw him more often. Not always close enough to speak, but always near enough for her to feel safer than before. He moved through the woods like a guardian spirit, protective without claiming ownership, attentive without demanding notice. She found bundles of precisely cut firewood stacked near her family's fence at dawn. Her mother called it neighborly kindness, assuming some rancher passed by, but Beverly knew. Tawa didn't need praise. The mountain respected him because he served without seeking reward. It wasn't long before Little Crow, an eager boy of 12 from Tawa's settlement, approached her while she gathered water near the well. He spoke with the playful confidence of a child certain he carried important secrets. "You think of him," he teased, grinning wide. Beverly flushed, protesting weakly. Little Crow only laughed, saying the giant kept watch because he did not trust the cold. Beverly knew the boy meant the literal winter, but a deeper meaning stirred within her, leaving her heart unsteady. Not everyone welcomed this quiet bond. When Beverly ventured into town for supplies, she felt the shift in the air. People whispered behind mittens, glancing at her as though she carried some dangerous fire. Elias approached her with the same polished smile that once charmed her, asking whether she'd recovered, whether she needed help returning home. She politely refused, but he persisted, insisting she shouldn't rely on strangers, especially Apache men who, in his words, had intentions she didn't understand. His tone dripped with condescension that made her shoulders tighten. She attempted to walk away, but Elias followed until a shadow blocked his path. Tawa stood at the far end of the street, tall and unmoving. He didn't speak, didn't glare, but his presence alone made Elias falter. Beverly felt a tremor of safety sweep through her chest. Elias muttered something about watching out for her and retreated, leaving Beverly breathless with a mix of relief and shame. She didn't want conflict stirred on her behalf, but she also felt suddenly aware that someone saw her fear, truly saw it, without trying to exploit it. When she returned home that evening, snowflakes catching in her hair, she sensed movement near the woods. Tawa stood among the pines as though the trees had shaped themselves around him. She walked toward him slowly, unsure what she wanted to say yet unwilling to remain silent. He waited with patient stillness, listening to her unspoken thoughts. Beverly thanked him again, but this time her words held more weight. "Not just for the creek," she confessed quietly. "For today. For seeing me when others pretend not to." The wind softened, carrying her voice between them like a fragile thread. Tawa's eyes shifted with a flicker of warmth, though he remained composed. "You deserve to be seen," he replied, each word deliberate, as though he carved honesty into the air. She felt her heartbeat falter, then steady, finding a rhythm that matched the quiet around him. Before she could summon another thought, a distant howl rose from the hills. Tawa stiffened slightly, listening with the intensity of a man who understood the land's warnings. Something in his expression changed. Something protective, alert, shadowed by concern. Beverly felt the shift like a cold breath against her neck. He told her gently that she should return home before night deepened, his tone steady but edged with caution. She wanted to ask why, wanted to understand the tension gathering in his posture, but he stepped back into the darkened trees before she found the courage. Beverly stood alone at the edge of the clearing, the cold growing sharper around her. And for the first time since the creek swallowed her, she wondered not whether winter would test her again, but what danger Tawa had sensed that she could not yet see. The days that followed carried a strange quiet, the kind that slipped between thoughts and settled where fear and longing often hid. Winter had not loosened its grip, but something inside Beverly Carter had begun to thaw. She felt it in the way her hands steadied while tending the cabin fire, in the way she looked toward the treeline as though expecting someone to step from its shadows, in the way her heart beat with a new rhythm each time she remembered the calm strength of Tawa Greyhawk's voice. She told herself she was only grateful to the man who had saved her life, but gratitude had never felt so warm, nor so frightening. Her mother noticed the shift in her, before Beverly understood it herself. The older woman would pause, eyes softening as she watched her daughter move with lighter steps, humming beneath her breath, cheeks touched with a flush that had nothing to do with the cold. When Beverly asked why she was staring, her mother simply gave a knowing smile, and said the winter had not stolen everything after all. Beverly tried to brush it off, claiming she was only regaining strength, but even she didn't believe her own excuses. She ventured outdoors more often, partly to gather supplies and partly because the walls of the cabin felt too small for the thoughts growing inside her. The woods had become familiar, the quiet a comfort she hadn't expected. Each time she entered the pines, she felt as though the land itself held its breath, as though some unseen presence watched with careful eyes. And though she rarely saw Tawa, she sensed him the way one senses warmth near a fire long before its flame is visible. One morning, she found him crouched beside a fallen branch, examining tracks in the fresh snow. He didn't seem startled by her approach. Instead, he glanced up with eyes that held both recognition and caution, as though he had been expecting her. Beverly knelt beside him, brushing snow aside to see the prints he studied. "Wolf," he said, tracing the edges with a slow fingertip. "2, maybe 3. They roam closer than they should." His voice carried a gravity deeper than simple concern, and Beverly felt it tug at her chest. She asked if they were dangerous, though she feared the answer. Tawa explained that hungry wolves grew bold, drawn by the scent of livestock or weakness. Winter pressed them hard. Beverly realized he spoke not just of wolves but of the harsher truths that drove creatures, human or otherwise, to desperate choices. She listened, absorbing every detail, not because of danger but because she cherished hearing his thoughts. When she rose too quickly, dizzy from crouching, Tawa steadied her with one massive hand cupping her elbow. His touch was gentle, startlingly so, as if he feared breaking her. Beverly felt the warmth of his skin through her sleeve, felt her breath catch before she stepped back too abruptly, cheeks warming. Tawa withdrew his hand at once, eyes lowering not in shame but in respect. She whispered a soft thank you, unable to meet his gaze. He nodded, then stood and brushed snow from his palms. They walked together through the trees, an unspoken agreement guiding their steps. Beverly told him about the chores she needed to finish before nightfall, and he listened with quiet attentiveness that made her feel more valued than she ever felt with Elias. Tawa spoke of gathering herbs for elders in his settlement, of repairing tools for the winter hunts, of teaching Little Crow how to read river patterns. Beverly found herself smiling without realizing. At the edge of her family's clearing, she paused, reluctant to end the moment. Tawa stopped beside her, gaze sweeping the horizon as though memorizing the shape of her home. Beverly didn't want to admit how deeply she already relied on his presence, but the truth pressed behind her ribs like an unspoken confession. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but a shout from behind startled them both. Little Crow burst from the trees, panting with excitement, waving a string of rabbit skins. He greeted Beverly cheerfully, then turned to Tawa with eager pride. Tawa ruffled the boy's hair, his stern expression softening in a way Beverly hadn't seen before. Watching them together stirred something inside her, something tender and unexpected. The giant warrior who intimidated half the town knelt to hear a child's breathless story, as though it were the most important tale in the world. Beverly realized then that strength was not measured by fearlessness alone, but by the gentleness one chose despite carrying power. Little Crow tugged at her hand, insisting she come see the trap he had set near the creek. Beverly laughed, following the boy with light steps. Tawa stayed a few paces behind, watchful yet allowing her space to enjoy the moment. When they reached the small trap, Beverly praised the boy's work sincerely. His smile widened, and he proudly explained that Tawa had taught him everything. Tawa corrected him softly. "You learn because you listen." Beverly felt those words echo inside her. She wondered if he knew they reached far deeper than the boy's lesson. As afternoon waned, Tawa offered to escort Beverly home. She accepted without hesitation. Little Crow ran ahead, delighted by the snow, while she and the giant walked in silence that hummed with unspoken meaning. Beverly found herself wanting to ask Tawa why he watched over her, why he stacked wood near her fence, why he lingered in the woods as though bound to her safety by an invisible thread. But fear held her tongue. She wasn't ready for answers that might unravel the fragile calm she had built. When they reached the clearing, Little Crow darted off after spotting a squirrel, leaving Beverly and Tawa standing alone. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, heart pulsing loud enough she feared he could hear it. Tawa's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual. Something flickered in his expression. Something restrained, something heavy with unsaid truth. Before either could speak, the crunch of boots on snow shattered the fragile stillness. Elias Ward stepped from behind a nearby pine, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes burning with bitter jealousy. Beverly felt her stomach drop. His gaze flicked between her and Tawa with thinly veiled disdain. He demanded to know what she was doing alone in the woods with a man like that, his words sharp as freezing rain. Beverly straightened, her pulse spiking with anger, but before she could respond, Tawa shifted slightly, placing himself between her and Elias. Not aggressively, but protectively, like a wall built of silence and resolve. Elias sneered, accusing Tawa of filling her head with foolish ideas, of taking advantage of a woman too naive to know better. Beverly felt humiliation rise like heat beneath her skin. She wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself and the man who had shown her nothing but respect, but her throat tightened. Tawa did not move, did not argue, did not lift a hand. He simply stood with steady eyes that made Elias falter. Elias spat a final insult before turning away, boots crunching furiously through snow. Beverly's breath trembled. Not from fear, but from the realization of how small Elias suddenly seemed compared to the quiet dignity of the man beside her. Tawa turned to her, concern softening his features. Beverly felt the weight of her own silence pressing against her chest. She managed a whisper, telling him she was sorry, though she didn't know whether she apologized for Elias or for allowing fear to keep her quiet. Tawa shook his head once, slowly, as though accepting none of her guilt. The sky darkened as clouds gathered above the pines. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, scattering snowflakes in swirling patterns that danced between them. Beverly wrapped her shawl tighter, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled her. It was the truth rising within her, the truth she no longer knew how to ignore. As Tawa guided her a few steps closer to home, his hand hovered near her back without touching, offering comfort she felt as surely as a warm flame. She stopped suddenly, turning toward him. Her breath caught when she saw the faint worry in his eyes, worry meant for her. Her heart beat in a rhythm she hadn't known before, a rhythm that spoke of longing, fear, and undeniable awakening. She opened her mouth to speak, to confess something small, something honest, but thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the mountains like an omen. Tawa looked toward the storm with attention she had never seen in him. Beverly felt a chill sweep over her, as he whispered the words that tightened the air around them. They are closer than before. Wolves are not the only danger now. And Beverly realized with a shiver that he wasn't speaking of animals. The storm arrived quietly at first, a distant growl slipping between the mountains like some warning carried by the wind. Beverly Carter felt the vibration of it in her ribs, even before the thunder formed into a full sound. She stood beside Tawa Greyhawk, breath unsteady, watching the worry settle across his features with an unmistakable gravity. For days she had sensed something changing, something shifting beneath the surface of their quiet moments, as though fate itself moved closer each time their eyes met. Now that invisible tension had gathered into a storm front that neither could outrun. Tawa turned toward her, snow gathering on his shoulders like pale feathers. "You must return home," he said, voice low, calm, but sharpened by urgency. Beverly nodded, though her heart resisted every word. Something in his posture, stiff, alert, told her the danger he sensed did not belong to winter or wolves. She wanted to ask what he feared, but the storm cracked again, scattering her courage like brittle leaves. They walked quickly toward the cabin, silence stretching between them, heavy with everything she didn't know how to say. When they reached the clearing, her mother rushed out, pulling Beverly inside with frantic hands. Tawa's shadow lingered just beyond the doorway, tall against the rising wind. Her mother thanked him breathlessly, unaware of how deep his vigilance ran. Beverly stepped inside reluctantly, watching him turn back toward the woods with long strides, disappearing once again into the wilderness that seemed to claim him. That night she lay awake listening to the storm churn against the roof. Snow battered the windows, wind howled through loose chinks in the walls, and yet none of it unsettled her as much as the memory of Tawa's voice. "Wolves are not the only danger now." His words echoed through her chest, stirring fear and resolve in equal measure. She wanted to trust her own strength, but she had never been this brave before. Her entire life she had bent to others' expectations, letting the world decide her worth. But the world she knew had changed the moment Tawa lifted her from the frozen river. She was beginning to realize she was not living for the town anymore. She was living for something warmer, deeper, and painfully real. At dawn she rose before her mother and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the land shrouded in untouched white. She tightened her shawl and made her way toward the treeline. Each step felt both terrifying and necessary. She didn't know what she would say to Tawa, only that she couldn't remain trapped between fear and longing. The path curved between pines heavy with frost, and with every breath she felt herself walking deeper into a truth she could no longer hide. She found him near a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, gathering herbs from the sheltered ground. His hair fell loose around his shoulders, dark against the snow, and his broad back moved with slow concentration. He sensed her presence before she spoke, turning with a look she couldn't fully read, surprise, relief, and something guarded beneath. Beverly stepped closer, her pulse loud in her ears. "I needed to see you," she said softly. The words trembled as though still learning how to stand. Tawa rose slowly, taller than the morning light behind him, eyes searching hers as though ensuring she came by choice, not fear. "Winter is harsh for those who wander alone," he replied, not unkind, but with a distance that stung deeper than the cold. She swallowed hard. "You've been watching over me. I know that. I know you have been near even when I didn't see you." Tawa's jaw tightened fractionally, as though he feared what her understanding meant. "You were in danger," he said simply. "That is all." But Beverly shook her head. "No, that isn't all." She took a step closer, then another, until she could see the flicker in his eyes. "You kept your distance, but you were always there. And I have been walking through winter pretending I didn't feel it." Tawa looked away, gaze drifting toward the mountains as though searching for strength in their stillness. "Your life will be harder if people see us speak too long," he murmured. "I do not want to bring trouble to your family." Beverly felt a sharp pain at the thought, not because he was wrong, but because he believed she should fear the world more than she trusted her own heart. "Trouble follows me whether you're near or not," she whispered. "Elias proved that. The town whispers prove that. I'm tired of living in a way that keeps other people comfortable while I freeze alone." Tawa's breath formed a cloud between them. He seemed to wrestle with something deep inside him, something shaped by years of restraint. Beverly waited, letting silence soften around them like falling snow. Finally he spoke, voice thickened by emotion he fought to hide. "When I carried you from the water, I knew you were brave. But bravery still needs protection." She stepped closer, closing the delicate distance between their shadows. "And who protects you, Tawa? Who knows your heart?" He inhaled sharply, as though unused to anyone seeing the man beneath the legend the mountains revered. She reached out then, not touching him, but offering the space between them as a bridge. "I want to understand you," she whispered. Before he could respond, Little Crow came running through the trees, breathless and wild-eyed. "They're coming!" he cried. Beverly startled, instinctively moving closer to Tawa. He steadied the boy with a firm hand, asking who and why. Little Crow pointed toward the valley, voice trembling. "Men from town. Sheriff Lane is trying to stop them, but Elias said the Apache are hiding dangerous things. He said Beverly is being led astray." The name dropped like a stone. Beverly's stomach knotted. Tawa's eyes hardened with a protective fire she had seen only once before, the day Elias confronted them. He knelt before Little Crow, urging him to return home and warn the elders. The boy nodded and sprinted away, leaving an echo of fear in the snow. Tawa straightened, gaze sweeping the forest as though measuring the distance between danger and safety. Beverly saw the moment his decision formed. He wanted to send her home. He wanted to keep her far from any line of fire. He wanted to shield her from the ugliness that ignorance always birthed. But Beverly stepped in front of him, chest rising with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Do not ask me to hide," she said, voice trembling but true. "I am done running from things that matter." Tawa stared at her, breath held, as though seeing her fully for the first time. Beverly felt her heart drum in her throat. She knew this moment would decide everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I choose to stand with you." The wind shifted, carrying her words between them like a vow. Something inside Tawa broke open then, not in pain but in revelation. He reached out instinctively, then stopped before touching her, fingers trembling in restraint. Beverly lifted her hand, closing the distance that fear had carved for too long. Her fingertips brushed his palm, warm, real, anchoring them both. The contact was small, fragile, yet powerful enough that the world seemed to still around them. A twig snapped in the distance. Voices echoed faintly through the trees. Beverly's pulse spiked, but she didn't pull away. Tawa turned toward the sound, protective instinct surging. He whispered her name, her full name, as though speaking it anchored him. Beverly felt tears sting her eyes. The storm was coming faster than she expected, but for the first time she did not fear what waited on the horizon. Elias's voice rose through the pines, sharp and accusing, drawing closer. Tawa stepped in front of her, body shielding hers, breath steadying like a warrior preparing for the inevitable. Beverly pressed her hand to his back, heart bold and unwavering. And in that breathless moment before the confrontation broke upon them, she realized with sudden clarity that choosing him meant choosing the storm, and she did not want to step back. The sound of Elias's voice cut through the trees like a knife drawn too quickly, sharp and trembling with the kind of anger born from wounded pride. Tawa stepped forward without hesitation, his body forming a quiet wall of strength between Beverly and the approaching men. Snow swirled around them, catching in his loose hair, settling across his broad shoulders like the mountain itself had crowned him with winter. Beverly remained close behind him, her hands steady against the warmth of his back, feeling the tension coiled in his stance. She had never felt so fragile or so brave at the same time. Elias emerged first, breath puffing in angry bursts, followed by two ranchers who looked less certain than he did. His gaze snapped to Beverly, disbelief and fury twisting his expression. "You've let him manipulate you," he said, voice shaking. "You're too foolish to see it." Beverly flinched, but Tawa didn't move. He stood with quiet dignity, neither rising to the insult nor retreating from it. His silence alone made Elias's rage look small. Beverly stepped out from behind Tawa, though her heart hammered painfully. "I am not fooled," she said, keeping her voice calm. "What I choose with a clear mind." Elias laughed sharply, calling her naive, calling Tawa dangerous, claiming the town had a right to intervene. The ranchers shifted uneasily, glancing between Beverly's steadiness and Tawa's unshaken calm. The mountain winds carried a warning, stirring branches overhead like restless spirits. Tawa finally spoke, voice deep and grounded. "I have done nothing except protect her." His words fell heavy as truth laid bare. Elias spat back that protection was a disguise, that men like Tawa always wanted something in return. Beverly felt the sting of old shame rise, but she stepped closer to the man who had never once asked anything of her heart. "You're wrong," she said. "He has shown me more respect in silence than you ever did with your promises." Elias faltered, face reddening. For a moment he seemed to consider lunging forward, but Tawa's steady gaze held him frozen. Beverly sensed the shift before it fully formed. This was the moment she could no longer hide what winter had revealed to her. She turned to Tawa, breath trembling, and reached for his hand. The ranchers exchanged glances, startled by her boldness. Elias looked as though the ground beneath him had cracked. Tawa's fingers closed gently around hers, warm and reverent. Beverly lifted her face, letting the truth she had carried bloom without fear. "My place is with you," she whispered, voice steady despite the storm inside her. For the first time his guarded expression broke, and something raw and vulnerable shone through. He stepped toward her, lowering his head until his forehead touched hers. His voice trembled like a river breaking through thaw. "I have loved you since the moment winter tried to steal you. I feared it. But I will not fear you." The ranchers stepped back, touched not by romance but by something undeniable. truth spoken without shame. Elias turned away, defeated by what could no longer be undone. Snow drifted gently around them as though blessing the vow, and Beverly melted into Tawa's embrace, realizing love was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to stand unafraid.